we're still supplying the Ukrainians. We're sending things over there. Now, but you got to look at where the money goes and the activities as opposed to listening to the rhetoric.
The U.S. continues to support Ukraine against Putin for a mix of geopolitical, strategic, and economic reasons that tie directly into its long-term interests. From a geopolitical standpoint, Washington views Russia's invasion as a direct threat to the post-World War II international order. Supporting Ukraine signals to allies in NATO and beyond that America remains committed to collective defense and deterrence, especially in Europe. It also prevents Russia from regaining dominance over Eastern Europe, which has been a long-standing U.S. strategic concern since the Cold War.
And that's when you discover really nothing has changed very much since Biden left. And so that's the problem, too. So I think Mr. Netanyahu has serious problems, but he still has a great deal of power and influence, and he's not going to give that up. And that includes power and influence over us. Remember, if he backs down from any of this, that's the end of his Greater Israel Project, which has implications for Syria, for Lebanon, for Egypt, for Jordan, for everybody. He's not prepared to do that. He says that it's not over, and I'm going to continue pressing forward. And I still think he has enormous support from the Israeli population. So that's why I've said from the beginning that what began with the attack on Iran during our negotiations with the Iranians is not over. That was a pause, not an end to the conflict. And that's going to re-erupt, I suspect, in September.
Why don't other Middle Eastern countries such as Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE unite with Iran and wage war against Israel to counter the so-called Greater Israel Plan and protect Palestinians from what many describe as genocide? There are several key reasons. Different priorities. Egypt and Jordan both have peace treaties with Israel, which bring them U.S. aid, security cooperation, and political stability. Risking all of that in a large-scale war would destabilize their governments and economies. Arab-Iran rivalry. Sunni Arab states like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and Jordan often see Shia Iran as a bigger long-term threat than Israel, due to Tehran's influence in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen. This deep mistrust blocks any chance of a united military front.
The Israeli Air Force, other than its inability to necessarily, as you point out, overwhelm and utterly destroy the integrated air defenses in Iran, which were damaged and have since been repaired and are growing increasingly effective, as I'm told, through various intelligence sources. But keep something in mind. If you believe in what you're doing, you keep doing it, regardless of the potential downsides. As long as we continue to subsidize the Israeli economy and keep that afloat, and we're pumping huge quantities of money into that place. It's not just military, it's also to keep up the standard of living, because otherwise Israel would fall apart, overnight without that kind of economic subsidy. Aga base continues to support the kind of policy that goes on. It's not easy for me to understand or justify. I'm just saying these are the facts. So if you look at that, you look at the enormous quantity of money that's on hand to continue to buy support in Congress. If you look at the people that surround the president and who they are and what they represent and the sectors from which they've come, particularly the financial sector, there's no reason to expect any change. So I think we'll see a resumption of the war. I think we're going to see more people killed. Now, what will that provoke in the region? And could that bring in the Russians, the Chinese, and others? That's eminently possible. And that's a whole different, set of questions worth exploring. But right now, I think it can continue. So I do not sign up for the notion that Israel, because of its obvious internal strains, is necessarily incapable of sustaining the larger operation. Well, the Israelis, I'm told, are also trying to recruit mercenaries from various sources in the West, people that are willing to come in there and do the job for money. they're also trying to entice Jews from the United States, North America, and other parts of Western Europe to come back and join the IDF and fight. That's not going very well. So I think there's no doubt he's in a lot of trouble, but he still has his ace in the hole, and that's absolute control over us. And we are not scaling back our support in any way, shape, or form. And we are providing the Israeli Defense Force with everything that it could possibly need in Venezuela as another potential Saddam Hussein who needs to be removed. We see how well that regime change worked in Iraq. The people of Iraq want us out of the country, and Iraq is now closely aligned with Iran, the very state we said we didn't want to have any say in what happened in Iraq. We did everything we could to put them into power in Iraq. So I think now we're dealing with something similar in Venezuela. I hope we don't think in terms of direct intervention, because if we do, we'll ultimately regret it. On the other hand, I fully support the notion that the drug trafficking and criminality that emanates from Venezuela and moves north via sea and up through Central America and over the Mexican border, all of that needs to be dealt with very substantially. But I would not go down there to fix it, because our track record of fixing those kinds of things is not good. But I see a lot of evidence that we're building up for something like that. At the same time, we see a buildup going on right now in the Middle East to prepare Israel for what ostensibly appears to be Israel's resumption of war with Iran. And of course, we've been involved in Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we had a nice, beautiful reality TV program showing Azeris, Aliyev, and Pashinyan, the leader of Armenia, sit together and supposedly sign some great peace accord. That all seems to be falling apart pretty rapidly, and the various mafias that had kept Aliyev in power are now really toying with his removal, because they've been utterly annihilated inside Russia, and their hopes and dreams for expanding their control and influence and money are evaporating. And the Armenians that normally sell all of their fruit to the Russians have been halted at the Russian border and can't export anything. So I think we're losing, frankly. And a lot of that, of course, is Israel inspired. Most of it is, although we also want to break up the BRICS, one belt, one road back to China that runs up through Iran and through Azerbaijan and Central Asia. It's not going to work. But we're busy trying to do those things. And then we have this business in Venezuela germinating. And at home, we've gone into Washington, and now the president's talking about going to other cities. Well, that's all fine, well, and good. But again, where's the coherent strategy? Are we just listening to the reality TV show again? Oh, I thought of this last night. This is what we're going to do. And everybody says, oh, that's great. We're going to do this now. There doesn't seem to be any coherence. There aren't any cogent arguments for or against things. Don't see any discussions. And our position overseas, if you go back to the aftermath of the Vietnam War, and I entered the Army from the Winter Ranger course. I graduated from West Point in 76, but I went through obviously armored training and then went to the Winter Ranger course. So I reached my first unit of where I served, a cavalry unit in Germany, in March of 1977. Now, our Army, even at that point, was in very bad shape. And I would argue that by 1975, we had really bottomed out. The Vietnam War destroyed the United States Army. It wasn't just the NVA and the Viet Cong. Many of the policies that we had in place, the way the generals operated and managed the force, destroyed the United States Army. It then took from, I would argue, from 1975 to 1985 to rebuild the old Army. We didn't really build a fundamentally new Army. We just took the old World War II structure, improved upon it, put new equipment in it. So the notion that some agreement could involve what you just mentioned, and that force would be meaningful in any way, shape, or form, is absurd. In the meantime, the force that he described would be sitting across from a Russian force that is very well trained, battle hardened, now very, very well led, I would argue, and has great technology at its disposal and knows how to fight. The whole thing is ludicrous nonsense. So you got to go back to something like the Austrian State Treaty. And that needs to be the model. And that involved no no U.S., European, NATO forces under any circumstances inside Austria. You'll remember when we flew back from Saudi Arabia in 1991, we actually had to fly around Austria because the Austrians were neutral. They wouldn't allow us just flying troops back from the Middle East to enter their airspace. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a truly neutral state. That's what the Russians want, with limitations on what they can do. And as it's been pointed out repeatedly by everyone from Ambassador Friedman to Professor Mearsheimer and a whole host of others, neutrality was the best thing that ever happened to Austria. They now have a higher standard of living than the Germans do, and that was never true in the past. Now, President Modi, who, in my judgment, is the leader of one of the most important countries on the planet, India, with what, 1.1 billion or 1.2 billion people, refuses to take phone calls now from President Trump. Won't talk to him. I think that's very unfortunate. But that's a product of the tariff business, which I think has backfired badly for the most part on the United States. So the whole thing is a mess. But the reality TV show continues. And Americans are easily swayed by optics. If it looks good and sounds good, it must be good. And that's where most Americans that watch the mainstream media that we were talking about earlier really reside. They reside in the corner that watches the big screen, and they are mesmerized by the reality TV show. You heard what Ted Cruz had to say in his discussion with Tucker. I think Ted Cruz is the proverbial tip of the iceberg. He can dress it up in whatever form he wants with religion or anything else, but the bottom line is the money has been invested. The return on that investment is the war that Israel is waging with our support in the region. So that's not going to change. What I would say is that our interest globally is very straightforward. We're always interested in stability. So, or we should be, so that if you see evidence for a potential conflict emerging, such as we saw in January, February, March of 2022, our immediate interest was not to gain control of resources or minerals or anything else, or oil or gas. It was to find a way to restore some measure of stability and order, a degree of stability and order that could exist without the presence or use of American military power. The best arrangement is an arrangement with which everybody can live, not necessarily the ones that we support. That's true in the Middle East. We always want to do business. We want good commercial relations. That's why the fact that someone like Modi, even though India's contribution to our trade is somewhere in the neighborhood of what, 3%, 4%. There's very little in the United States that we buy from India. Even though that's the case, this is the leader of a very large country with a potentially strategic role in the world, and he won't talk to us anymore. And it's all about the tariff business. It's even more serious with the Chinese for obvious reasons. I don't need to go into that.